Barron Trump launched a lawsuit to silence Jasmine Crockett, confident the media and the courtroom were in his pocket. But in less than 10 seconds, one former aide exposed a hidden plan and turned the entire case upside down. It didn't come as a whisper. It came like a punch to the face. Barron Trump sues Jasmine Crockett for defamation. The headline ripped across every major outlet, and within minutes, it was everywhere. Social media caught fire. Cable news snapped into round-the-clock coverage. Podcasts, blogs, talking heads. Everyone had something to say. The internet was chewing through theories before anyone had even read the official complaint. It wasn't just the lawsuit itself. It was who was suing and who was being sued. Barron Trump, the youngest of Donald Trump's children, now 19, reserved for years, rarely speaking to the press, suddenly stepping into the spotlight with a full-blown federal lawsuit. Not over politics, not over business, but against Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, one of the sharpest, loudest, and most unfiltered voices in Congress. And the claim? That she knowingly spread malicious falsehoods about him during a televised panel discussion just 3 weeks earlier. The timing couldn't have been worse, or better, depending on your angle. Trump Sr. was deep in campaign trail chaos. Crockett had just returned from a fiery oversight hearing. Tensions were already high. This was the match tossed into the gasoline. Journalists dug in immediately. The lawsuit, filed in a district court in San Diego, cited Crockett's statement that Barron had quietly inherited the worst parts of his father's character and was using the family name to pull strings behind the scenes. That last part, the allegation of backdoor influence, is what his lawyers claimed caused irreparable harm to his reputation. People were quick to split sides. Trump loyalists called it justice. Crockett's defenders called it intimidation. And Jasmine? She didn't flinch. She walked out of her townhouse in Fort Worth the morning after the filing, coffee in hand, hair tied back, and told reporters with a short laugh, "If they think this is going to scare me quiet, they've clearly never watched a single committee hearing I've been in." She paused, looked straight at the camera, and added, "They picked the wrong one." Still, behind closed doors, her team was shaken. A lawsuit like this wasn't just media noise. It meant depositions, discovery, cross-examinations, and above all, exposure, which is exactly what the Trump family had always been known to exploit. Crockett's lead attorney, Marcia Tillman, known for her ruthless efficiency in high-profile defamation cases, advised immediate caution. "They're not after money," she said during their first strategy call. "They're after blood, reputational blood. They want to drag you through court and watch you squirm on live TV." Jasmine's reply was simple: "Then I better make it worth watching." But that didn't change the stakes. Within 48 hours, conservative networks had revived years-old footage of Crockett from college debates, town halls, even private speeches recorded without her knowledge. Every misstep she'd ever made, real or edited, was suddenly prime-time material. In the middle of it all, Jasmine sat quietly with her father in the living room of his two-bedroom house outside Abilene. He glanced at her and said, "You sure about this, baby girl?" She didn't respond right away. Instead, she asked, "Why does it always take a fight to make people pay attention?" Her father smiled faintly. "Because the truth don't move unless you push it." But that was before the hearing started, before the cameras crowded outside the courthouse, before one witness turned everything upside down. The real story hadn't even begun, but the air had already changed. The footage wasn't grainy. It was crystal clear, full HD, and pulled from the live broadcast of a political roundtable aired 3 weeks before the lawsuit. The topic that night was the influence of political families in shaping public narratives. On the panel sat 4 guests, but only one stood out: Jasmine Crockett. Bold voice, sharp tone, eyes that didn't dodge anything. She wasn't there to be polite. She was there to be honest. Midway through the discussion, the host turned to her and asked, "Do you believe members of the Trump family, especially the younger ones, are continuing to hold sway in today's political climate, despite no official office?" Jasmine sat forward, no hesitation. "Absolutely, and it's not always above board. People want to believe that Barron's just this quiet kid in the background. But that's not true. He's working through proxies, pushing narratives, and let's be real, he's inherited the worst parts of his father's playbook." The room went quiet for a second, not shocked, but alert. The host raised an eyebrow. "That's a strong accusation. Any specific examples?" Crockett didn't blink. "Let's talk about the cleanup media cycle that mysteriously began 2 days after I grilled the Trump-appointed judge during the House hearing. Barron didn't appear, sure, but 3 sources close to that media push are tied to his personal network. If we pretend he's not involved, we're being naive. That was the sentence that ended up in the lawsuit. The panel carried on. No one stormed off. No one shouted her down. It was political TV, rough, blunt, fast-moving. But in the weeks that followed, those words started circulating like wildfire, especially among conservative influencers who accused her of attacking a private citizen and targeting the Trump family for political clout. Crockett never backpedaled. She doubled down. 2 days after the episode aired, she tweeted, "Power without accountability is a threat to democracy. If Barron Trump is playing political chess from behind closed doors, then yes, I'm going to call that out. Period." That tweet was screenshotted in the complaint as evidence of continued malicious conduct. But to those close to her, none of this was calculated. It was frustration. Months of seeing political narratives quietly manipulated through anonymous sources and coordinated campaigns, especially after key hearings where Crockett took firm positions. Her chief of staff, Theo McMillan, was one of the first to flag the shift. He pulled her aside one afternoon after a strategy session and said, "Have you noticed every time you open your mouth about judicial bias, there's some story out the next day trying to make you look unhinged?" Jasmine nodded. "Like clockwork." Theo sighed. "Feels like a hands on the wheel. And it ain't random." That was when the suspicion grew. And when the comments on air happened, it wasn't an off-the-cuff moment. It was pressure breaking through. Still, most people missed the full context. The clip was chopped up, reposted without the follow-up dialogue, twisted to sound more personal than political. Online threads painted Jasmine as reckless, obsessed, even jealous. None of it made sense, but it spread like wildfire anyway. Back in her office in Fort Worth, Jasmine rewatched the full panel clip one evening with her team. She paused it and asked, "Did I say anything false?" Theo leaned back in his chair. "No, but you poked the nest." She sipped her tea and said quietly, "Maybe the nest needed poking." What she didn't know at that moment, what none of them could have guessed, was that someone on the inside had seen the whole thing play out before, and that person had receipts. Not speculation, not anonymous tips, but names, emails, memos, and a timeline that would later break the case wide open. But before the storm hit, the Trump team made their first move, and it was loud. The lawsuit wasn't hastily thrown together. It was precise, strategic, timed down to the hour. Filed in federal court on a quiet Tuesday morning, it came with a carefully worded press release, signed by Barron Trump's legal representative, Theodore Langham, a high-powered attorney based out of Newport Beach, known for defending billionaires and managing reputational crises for high-profile heirs. The statement read, "Ms. Crockett's comments were not only false, but calculated to injure Mr. Trump's reputation and safety. We will be pursuing every legal avenue available to address this malicious behavior." Those words weren't chosen casually. By mid-afternoon, right-wing commentators were parroting the same points. Calculated, injurious, reckless, disregard. Over and over. The messaging was locked in tight. Barron had remained out of politics, they said. He had taken the high road and stayed silent. But this was an attack too far, inside their Los Angeles media war room, a rented floor in an upscale tower near Century City. Barron's team already had a full roadmap of the narrative. Video clips were prepared, commentators briefed, social media influencers given talking points disguised as personal takes. Everything was built to frame Barron as a wronged figure, a target of an unprovoked smear by a loud-mouthed lawmaker looking for relevance. And Barron? He was mostly off camera, but not invisible. Sources close to the operation told reporters he had been deeply involved behind the scenes, approving content, greenlighting legal language, and asking for weekly briefings. Still, when asked publicly, his lawyer stuck to the story. Mr. Trump is focused on protecting his privacy and integrity. That line was repeated almost word for word during every media appearance by Langham. What many didn't know was that behind closed doors, things weren't quite so calm. 3 days after the filing, Barron sat at the long glass table in the legal office's private conference room, scrolling through screenshots on a tablet. He turned to Langham. "Why hasn't she responded yet? She's not scared, she's stalling." Langham, always composed, replied, "Because she's smart. She's not going to play her hand too early." Barron narrowed his eyes. "Well, she better understand. This isn't just about her words. It's about respect. My name's not going to be dragged by a woman with a Twitter account and a microphone." There was silence. Langham didn't respond to that comment. He knew that going after a sitting member of Congress came with risk, especially one with Crockett's national platform. But he also knew Barron didn't care about risk. He cared about control. What they didn't anticipate or maybe underestimated, was Crockett's refusal to blink. In the following days, she made no apology. She didn't retract her words. She didn't post a video to clarify or soften her tone. Instead, she let the story breathe, let the Trump camp spin it themselves, while her team did what they did best, dig. Crockett's legal advisor, Marsha Tillman, had seen this type of lawsuit before. Wealthy plaintiff, loose claim, media storm. But she'd also seen one thing time and again. Aggressive lawsuits like this often came with skeletons, and if they kept quiet long enough, someone always came forward. She said it plainly in a private call with Jasmine. This isn't just about defamation. This feels like a warning shot. Jasmine replied, then let's send one back. That's when Marsha made the move that changed the entire case. She contacted a former communications aide who had worked in both the Trump and Biden administrations, someone with inside knowledge, someone who'd seen firsthand how narratives were shaped and spread, and who had recently been pushed out quietly from a major PR firm linked to Trump donors. His name wasn't made public yet, but his message was clear. He told Tillman, I've got documents, and I've got a reason to speak. What no one knew then was that his words would be the exact 9 seconds that ended everything. But before that bomb dropped, the courtroom would get its first look at just how deeply this feud had been planned. The first meeting with Jasmine's legal team didn't take place in a law office or government building. It was held in a small, privately rented conference room in downtown El Paso, a quiet spot away from D.C., the cameras, and the endless noise. The table was cluttered with files, laptops, and 3 empty coffee cups by noon. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, letting everyone speak before she did. Marsha Tillman clicked through a PowerPoint presentation that was anything but flashy. Bullet points, court precedents, key quotes. But the weight of it? Heavy. They're painting you as emotional and undisciplined, she said, but their own filing is thin, intentionally vague. That tells me they're relying on perception more than facts. Across the table, Theo scrolled through a printed packet of social media threads. Look at this, he said. They've got coordinated replies within minutes of each other. Half these accounts share the same phrasing. Reckless attack from a desperate woman in Congress. Jasmine took the page and read it quietly, then placed it down. So we've got a pattern, she said. Now we just need proof of intent. That's when Marsha looked up and said something that changed the energy in the room. We may have it. Phones were silenced, doors shut tighter. She opened her laptop and shared the summary of her call with the unnamed former aide. He had reached out through a mutual contact in media, claimed he had documents, emails, memos, all tied to a narrative-building effort launched just days before the lawsuit. Not rumors, not hunches, internal communications. At first, Jasmine was skeptical. Why would he help us? Marsha shrugged. He said he left on bad terms, said this one got too dirty for him, and he doesn't like how fast they weaponize the media machine. Theo chimed in. Sounds like guilt. Jasmine added, or someone trying to clean their hands before something worse comes out. Either way, they agreed to hear him out. A Zoom call was arranged, with no recordings allowed, no screenshots, no identifying info shared. The man's voice was steady, older, clear. He didn't ramble. He didn't try to make it personal. He just laid it out. There was a file labeled Strategic Public Retaliation. It included Crockett's name, media targets, talking points, and a list of headlines they hoped would catch fire. It wasn't just Barron's idea, but he signed off on it. That's in the memo, dated, authenticated. Theo leaned in, his tone sharp. You saying Barron Trump approved a document to smear a sitting congresswoman and then sued her for reacting to it? The man didn't hesitate. Yes, and I'll testify if I have to, but only if I'm protected. It was a lot to absorb. Jasmine stayed quiet for a full minute. Then she looked at Marsha and said, if he's telling the truth, this isn't just a lawsuit anymore. This is coordinated manipulation, and I'm not staying silent. The decision was made. Marsha filed a motion the next day, requesting the court allow a surprise witness for the defense under sealed identity until the hearing. That motion sent waves through the courtroom, not just for what it implied, but for who might be involved. Journalists speculated. Trump allies panicked, and the judge, a no-nonsense appointee known for fast rulings, approved the motion within 24 hours. Meanwhile, Jasmine remained outwardly calm. She kept attending hearings, spoke at 2 town halls, never once addressed the lawsuit directly. But privately, she prepared for war. She met with Theo in a parking garage the night before the first hearing. You sure about this? He asked. She nodded. If they wanted silence, they should have picked someone else. They thought the courtroom would be their arena, but they were about to find out. It was hers, too. San Diego's federal courthouse didn't look like the center of a political firestorm. On the outside, it was glass and stone, like any government building. But on that morning, the sidewalks were packed shoulder to shoulder. News crews, photographers, protesters, supporters on both sides. Barron Trump wasn't there. His team said he was monitoring from a private location. Jasmine Crockett was. She walked through the front doors at 8:41 a.m. wearing a charcoal gray suit with no jewelry. Her face was unreadable. Cameras flashed. Microphones stretched toward her. Someone shouted her name. She didn't stop. She didn't wave. Just walked straight in, head high. Inside the courtroom, the air was tense but quiet. The gallery was filled. Reporters lined the back row. On the plaintiff's side, Theodore Langham sat with 3 other attorneys, each with tablets, folders, and color-coded tabs. They looked ready for a marathon. On the defense side, Marcia Tillman sat beside Jasmine, calm and still, flanked by a junior associate and Theo, who was technically consulting, but mostly there to keep Jasmine grounded. Judge Bernice Kaplan entered at 9:06 sharp, former prosecutor, known for being fair but fast. She scanned the room like someone used to handling people who thought they were above her authority. She didn't smile. The hearing began with opening statements. Langham went first. His voice was smooth, almost soothing. Your Honor, the plaintiff, Mr. Trump, brings this suit not as a political statement, but as a citizen defending his name. The defendant, Congresswoman Crockett, falsely accused Mr. Trump of shadow influence and manipulation, with no evidence and with full knowledge of the harm it would cause. He went on to reference Crockett's comments on national television and her follow-up tweets. He framed them as reckless, repeated, and publicly amplified by her own office. Every word was calculated to make her sound dangerous, impulsive, and out of control. Then it was Marcia's turn. She stood without notes. This case isn't about reputation. It's about power. My client answered a question with honesty, based on credible information and a clear pattern of behavior. This lawsuit is an attempt to silence dissent and punish speech. We will show the court that the plaintiff not only sought to discredit Congresswoman Crockett, but initiated a behind-the-scenes campaign against her long before this lawsuit was filed. Judge Kaplan raised an eyebrow at that last line but said nothing. Yet. Witnesses were called next. The Trump team opened with a digital media expert who claimed Jasmine's words caused a measurable spike in online threats against Barron. He showed charts, graphs, even heat maps of social activity. On cross, Marcia was surgical. Can you prove the threats came from her followers? Not directly. Can you confirm she encouraged any threats? No. So what you're saying is, she spoke, and the internet did what the internet does? The witness hesitated. In a manner of speaking, yes. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a loss either. Next, the Trump team brought in a behavioral analyst who tried to argue that Jasmine's tone on the panel was provocative, emotionally charged, and designed to incite. It was a weird moment, more like a TED Talk than expert testimony. Even the judge seemed annoyed. Marcia objected twice, once successfully. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat silent, focused, jotting notes. She wasn't the target in the courtroom. Not yet. But the pressure was mounting. Every time her name was mentioned, every time a clip played or a tweet was projected, all eyes turned to her. Then, near the end of the day, Judge Kaplan called a brief recess. As the attorneys huddled in their corners, a notification buzzed on Theo's phone. He glanced down, read it, and handed it to Marcia. She looked at it, blinked once, then leaned toward Jasmine and whispered, "He's in, he'll testify." Jasmine didn't react. She just breathed in once, slow and deep. The surprise witness had officially agreed, and he was coming the next morning with everything he had. The court wasn't ready, but Crockett was. The courtroom was buzzing by 8 o'clock a.m., but not in the way most days begin. Word had leaked late the night before. Jasmine Crockett's team had added a new witness, unannounced, sealed. People speculated, argued, even placed bets online. Some said it was a former staffer. Others thought it might be a media whistleblower. No one guessed who actually walked through the doors. When Judge Kaplan entered, she was clearly aware of the noise surrounding the case, but she wasted no time. "Defense may proceed," she said, her voice clipped and direct. Marcia Tillman stood. "Your Honor, we call Mr. Garrett Wynn to the stand." There was a beat of silence, and then a shuffle of chairs and quick glances. Garrett Wynn. Not a household name, But to those in D.C. and campaign communication circles, it rang a bell. Former strategic advisor, spent time under both Trump and Biden media operations. Quiet reputation, rarely interviewed, never flashy. He walked in wearing a navy suit, thin-frame glasses, and the posture of a man used to staying behind the camera. He took the stand, was sworn in, and sat down with both hands folded in his lap. Marcia opened carefully. "Mr. Wynn, can you tell the court your most recent position?" "Until February of this year, I worked as senior media consultant at Park Bridge Strategies. And prior to that, I served as director of special communications projects under both the Trump and Biden White Houses." Langham stood immediately. "Objection. Relevance." Judge Kaplan didn't blink. "Overruled. Continue." Marcia nodded. "Mr. Wynn, during your time at Park Bridge, were you made aware of a communications campaign targeting Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett?" Wynn didn't flinch. "Yes." The air thinned. Marcia paced slowly. "Was Mr. Barron Trump involved in that campaign?" "Yes." The gallery shifted. Reporters looked up from their notepads. Cameras zoomed in. "How was he involved?" Wynn leaned forward slightly. He signed off on a memo titled Strategic Public Retaliation, which included targeted messaging, selected media partners, and a list of priority subjects. Congresswoman Crockett among them. Langham rose again. "Your Honor, I object to the term retaliation. It's loaded and prejudicial." Kaplan raised a hand. "He's quoting the document. Sit down." Wynn continued, now steady, confident. The memo outlined specific language to be used when referring to Ms. Crockett, words like unhinged, obsessed, and disgraced. It also referenced timing for media releases, coordinated tweets, and friendly influencers who would echo the messaging. Barron Trump reviewed and approved the final version. Marcia paused, then like clockwork. "And how long before this lawsuit was filed was that memo approved?" Wynn didn't hesitate. 3 weeks. Just 9 seconds. That's all it took. In 9 seconds, the entire framing of the lawsuit collapsed. What was once presented as a reaction to defamation now looked like a planned trap, an orchestrated media ambush that Barron himself had helped build long before Crockett ever appeared on that panel. Langham tried to shake Wynn on cross. He asked about motive, loyalty, even money. "Are you testifying for political reasons?" "No." "Have you been offered compensation?" "Not a dollar." "So why are you here?" Wynn finally looked right at him. "Because there's a line, and I watched them step over it." The courtroom was still. Judge Kaplan recessed for lunch. No one moved. It was as if the weight of those 9 seconds needed time to settle into the walls, into the minds of every journalist, every aide, every citizen who would see the headlines by the hour. Jasmine remained seated for a moment, staring at the front of the courtroom. Then she turned to Marcia and whispered, "They came in here thinking this would be my loss." Marcia smiled. Turns out they built their case on their own mistake. The press hadn't even typed up the quotes yet, but the damage was done. The courtroom was quieter after lunch, but it wasn't calm. The kind of silence that hovered wasn't peace. It was weight. Reporters didn't chatter. Even the bailiff looked uncomfortable, like something had shifted under the floor, and no one knew if it would hold. When Judge Kaplan returned to the bench, she adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "Counsel, I want to be very clear. The testimony provided by Mr. Wynn carries significant implications. I expect both sides to proceed with care. Continue." Marcia Tillman stood with a single folder in hand. She didn't carry notes this time. She didn't need to. Garrett Wynn had detonated the case. Now it was time to make sure the court didn't miss the pieces. "Your Honor," she began, "we are submitting into evidence the full internal memo Mr. Wynn referenced. The document is dated February 9th. It contains the signature of Mr. Barron Trump and includes 3 pages of strategy targeting Congresswoman Crockett specifically. We also have metadata showing it was accessed and modified by 2 individuals on Mr. Trump's personal team in the 48 hours following her televised remarks." Langham didn't object. There was nothing to object to. Marcia handed the memo to the clerk, and it was passed to the judge. Kaplan read the front page in silence. Her brow didn't move. Her fingers flipped through slowly. By the time she reached the final page, she looked up and spoke in the same even tone. "Is the plaintiff aware that this document exists?" Langham stood and replied carefully, "Your Honor, we are reviewing the document's authenticity and reserve the right to respond in full once our forensics team has had proper time to examine it." But it didn't matter. The court wasn't waiting, because what followed next wasn't legal argument. It was public perception, and that part doesn't operate on courtroom deadlines. By the time the day's session ended, the memo was already leaked. Whether it came from someone in the gallery, or a staffer, or a strategist trying to save face, it didn't matter. It was online. Screenshots flooded Twitter, threads on Reddit broke down every paragraph, and news anchors read it out loud during prime time. The phrase strategic public retaliation trended within 30 minutes. One commentator said, "This is Watergate with better lighting." Another joked, "They tried to silence a congresswoman and handed her the mic instead." Back in the courthouse parking garage, Jasmine sat in the backseat of an SUV with tinted windows. Theo climbed in beside her and handed over his phone. She scrolled through the mentions. Her name was everywhere. Support poured in. Old allies resurfaced. Even people who didn't particularly like her politics started speaking up, not because of ideology, but because they recognized what had just happened. Someone powerful tried to crush a critic and got caught red-handed. Jasmine looked out the window and said, "I didn't want it to be about me. I wanted people to look at the game behind the scenes, at how they move stories around like chess pieces." Theo leaned forward. "They're looking now." Meanwhile, inside the Trump camp, phones weren't being answered. Statements were delayed. One staffer reportedly quit on the spot. Langham canceled his appearance on 2 networks and issued a vague press release blaming coordinated political attacks. But no one was buying it, because 9 clear, deliberate, and authenticated seconds of testimony had shown that the lawsuit wasn't about protection. It was about revenge, about controlling the narrative. And it backfired. Hard. The following morning, media outside the courthouse had doubled. Protesters and supporters lined up again, but this time the signs had changed. People held posters that read, "Truth ain't defamation. Power fears accountability. Crockett was right." And Jasmine? She walked in just like she had before, quiet, unshaken. But now, she wasn't walking into the fire. She was walking through it, and still standing. The trial wasn't over yet, but the verdict in the public's mind was already written. By the time the court reconvened the next day, the tone had completely shifted. The energy inside wasn't tense anymore, it was defensive. Langham's team looked more like damage control consultants than lawyers. The swagger was gone. They moved slower, whispered more, checked their phones constantly. And as for Barron Trump, still nowhere to be seen. People began to notice. He hadn't made a single public appearance since the Wynn testimony. No statement, no video, not even a photograph. Rumors started swirling. He'd fired 2 advisors, flown back to Florida, even argued with his father. No one could confirm anything. And that silence only made things worse. Judge Kaplan opened the day with a reminder to both parties that the case was still ongoing and that further theatrics would not be tolerated. But at this point, the damage had already breached the walls of the courtroom. Marcia stood again, measured and quiet. "Your Honor, in light of yesterday's testimony, we ask the court to consider dismissing the case under grounds of malicious prosecution. We also request a formal inquiry into the misuse of the judicial process as a tool for political retaliation." Langham didn't even stand. He simply leaned into the mic and said, "We object to the characterization and reserve our response until we complete review of the submitted evidence." It was a stall, a weak one. Everyone in that room could feel the oxygen had been sucked out of their case. The lawsuit had begun as a bold strike. Now, it was being held together by paperwork and delay tactics. Reporters had already filed their headlines before noon. Trump's lawsuit against Crockett crumbles in court. Memo confirms Barron Trump approved targeted smear campaign. Jasmine Crockett turns defense into national moment. And outside, it was chaos. People who had never watched a court hearing before were tuning in. College students, retirees, office workers on lunch breaks, watching the live streams, debating online, pulling quotes. The memo had been downloaded, analyzed, and even annotated by political junkies and journalists. At a bar in Sacramento, 2 men in their 40s sat watching the coverage on a mounted screen. "You see this?" one said. "They tried to use the system to punish a woman for saying what everybody else was thinking." His friend nodded. "They tried it, and she lit them up with receipts." Even conservative media began to tread carefully. Some hosts pivoted entirely, now suggesting maybe the lawsuit had been ill-advised or premature. One segment ran with the headline, "Did Barron get bad legal advice?" No one was coming to clean this up, not convincingly. Meanwhile, Jasmine took no victory lap. She went back to her work, held a constituent meeting 2 days later in Lubbock, didn't talk about the case unless someone brought it up. And when they did, her response was the same every time. This wasn't about winning. It was about telling the truth and not backing down. But her silence didn't stop others from speaking up. A group of 6 House representatives released a joint statement condemning the use of legal action as a silencing tactic against elected officials doing their job. Civil rights lawyers praised the case as a wake-up call for public figures who think lawsuits can replace accountability. And on college campuses, Crockett became a talking point in political science lectures, a living example of how defamation law can be twisted into a threat and how transparency, even from a surprise witness, can tip the scales. As for Garrett Wynn, he went dark after his testimony. No interviews, no press tour, but people didn't forget his name. He was trending for 2 straight days. Some called him a hero, others questioned his motives, but nobody denied the impact he made. One journalist wrote, "He walked in quiet, walked out historic." Back in D.C., political circles took note, and while most didn't say it out loud, there was one undeniable shift. Jasmine Crockett had gone from a rising voice to a force no one could afford to underestimate. And just as the legal fallout began settling, the personal consequences were just beginning to show behind closed doors. The courtroom drama might have ended in public, but the real consequences, the ones that linger long after the headlines fade, began quietly, behind locked doors and closed mouths. Barron Trump returned to Palm Beach under the radar. No press pool followed. No cameras waited at the gates. His plane landed in the late afternoon, and according to one local reporter, he was met not by aides or advisors, but by his mother. Back at Mar-a-Lago, staffers were told to avoid conversations about the trial. Some were reassigned, a few were let go. Barron wasn't speaking to the media, and inside the house, he wasn't speaking much at all. 2 days after his return, he sat across from his father on a patio lined with gold-trimmed chairs and glass ashtrays. The tension wasn't loud. It was heavy, like neither of them wanted to say what they were thinking. "You should have kept it quiet," Donald finally muttered, lighting a cigar and flicking ash toward the railing. Barron didn't respond, just stared out over the lawn. "You gave her the spotlight," his father continued. "You had the upper hand. You gave it away." Barron's voice was low, flat. "I just wanted her to shut up." Donald raised an eyebrow. "That's not how the game works. You go after a politician, you better make sure they don't have ammunition." Silence again. It wasn't just disappointment. It was frustration. Not from losing a case, but from losing control of the narrative. For a family that had mastered the media for decades, this felt different, personal. And in Jasmine's world, the consequences were emotional, not political. She sat in the back of her father's pickup truck one night, the bed lined with old blankets and 2 folding chairs. West Texas sky above them. No noise but crickets and the hum of tires rolling on distant roads. He handed her a soda and asked, "How you holding up?" She took a long sip, then shrugged. "I don't feel like I won. I just feel exhausted." He nodded. "Truth'll do that. It don't shout. It just sits heavy." Jasmine let that sit for a second. "I wanted people to know what they do behind closed doors, the way they use money and influence to punish anybody who steps out of line." Her father looked at her. "And now they know, because you didn't fold." That part was true. She hadn't folded. But it had taken a toll. Friends called constantly. Former colleagues wanted interviews. One network offered her a special feature. She declined all of it. For the first time in weeks, she wanted quiet. Theo, though, never stopped moving. He was already building a digital archive of the case. Every filing, every media mention, every quote from the memo, to be used later, maybe as educational material, maybe something bigger. He didn't say what yet. In one meeting, he leaned toward her and asked, "What if this isn't the end of the fight? What if this is just the warning shot for what's next?" She sighed. "Then we'd be ready for the next one, just like this one." But behind that strength was something deeper, a sadness, not for herself, but for the state of everything around her. "People shouldn't have to be brave just to tell the truth," she said one afternoon. But somehow, that's become the price. Theo nodded, and for a brief moment, neither of them said anything. In private moments, Jasmine thought about Garrett Wynn. What made him finally speak? What did he risk to do it? She never got to thank him. Their lawyers kept them apart to avoid any claims of collusion. But she hoped he knew that his words, those 9 seconds, had changed more than a courtroom. They'd pierced the curtain. And now, people could see the machinery behind the public smiles and PR statements, the quiet machinery of reputation warfare, of silence disguised as civility. But even as the dust settled, one final chapter still waited. The story wasn't just about Jasmine or Barron anymore. It had become a question for the whole country. When power strikes without truth, who do we stand with? 2 weeks after the judge dismissed the lawsuit, Jasmine Crockett stood in a high school gymnasium in Las Cruces, New Mexico, facing a group of teenagers who had invited her to speak, not as a politician, not as someone trending, just someone who'd been through a fight and come out the other side. She leaned against the edge of the podium, no notes in hand, no speech prepared. "You don't have to be perfect to stand your ground," she told them. "You just have to know why you're standing in the first place." The kids were quiet, but they listened. You could tell. No scrolling, no whispering, just wide eyes and still hands. One student raised his hand and asked, "Were you scared?" She paused for a moment, then answered honestly, "Yes, but not for me. For what it means when people with money and power think they can decide what's true just by suing someone." That gymnasium wasn't Congress. It wasn't national television, but it mattered because the story had left the courtroom and entered living rooms, classrooms, barbershops, group chats, and it stayed there. The court of law ruled in her favor, but the court of public opinion went further. It made the case a warning and a mirror. A look at how easily speech could be punished if the people speaking weren't ready for the backlash. In the weeks that followed, 3 other public figures came forward, not with lawsuits, but with stories of similar pressure, quiet threats, media campaigns, whisper networks funded by deep pockets with long reach. Garrett Wynn's name popped up again, only this time in an op-ed. He wrote one piece for The Atlantic, titled "Truth Costs More Than Silence." He didn't talk about the case. He talked about the fear, about the machine, and about why he stepped out of it. The memo he testified about was now part of public record, archived, studied. Some law schools even began including the Crockett v. Trump case in lectures about political lawfare, how lawsuits can be filed not to win, but to wear people down. As for Barron, he faded, slowly, deliberately. No more press, no more photo ops. His team issued a short statement saying they'd chosen to move on and focus on positive engagements. But people remembered. They always do. Not because of who he was, but because of what he tried to do and how it failed. Inside Jasmine's office, life went on. Bills to read, hearings to prep for, communities to serve. But things weren't exactly the same. Constituents who once stood quietly in the back now walked up to shake her hand. A mother in Amarillo sent her a handwritten letter that said, "Thank you for standing up when most of us feel too small to speak." And Jasmine carried that letter in her briefcase, not because it made her proud, but because it reminded her of the stakes. One night, Theo walked into her office while she was working late. He dropped a folder on her desk. She looked up. "What's this?" "Your next speaking request. Georgetown wants you to guest lecture next month." She raised an eyebrow. "Me? Teach?" He smirked. "Seems like they've finally figured out you've got something to say." She smiled, tired but full. "Let's hope they're ready to hear it." And that's the thing. It wasn't just about winning one lawsuit. It was about what happens after, what people remember, what people carry forward. This case taught something deeper. Truth doesn't always shout louder than money, but when it's protected, even by one person, even for one moment, it can survive long enough to be heard. So the next time someone with power tries to quiet a voice by dragging it through court, maybe they'll think twice. Not because of fear, but because that tactic doesn't work the way it used to. People are paying attention now, and maybe that's the real shift. If you believe truth matters, even when it's messy, even when it's hard, subscribe. This story won't be the last, but if you're listening, it won't be ignored either.